to go. I'm going to go ahead and get us started here since we're right on the dot, and I want to welcome all of our participants from all over the country. I see people typing into our chat box here. It looks like people are joining from everywhere, and so welcome, and thank you so much for joining today. My name is William Moore with OJJDP NTTAC. We're going to get started in a little bit, but before we do, let's hop over to a quick poll question, and I want to know from folks, how do you rate your current knowledge on this particular topic of meeting the needs of adolescent youth? Would you say none, minimal, moderate, or extensive? Take a few minutes to just click on the radio button that coincides with your answer basically there. So let us know, how do you rate your current knowledge? I'm going to leave this up for about another couple of seconds here. And we still have people filing in, so I'm going to let people continue to file in here and leave this up while folks answer this question here. All right. Great. Thank you all for doing that. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now. Looks like we have a good amount of folks between moderate and minimal here, so great. Sounds like folks are going to learn a lot today. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and bring us back into the main room here, and let's go ahead and get us started for today. So again, good afternoon to everyone. Again, my name is William Moore. I am with OJJDP's NTTAC, and welcome to today's webinar, Teen Matters, Meeting the Needs of Adolescent Youth. Before we begin, I would like to take a couple of, on behalf of, brought to you by OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I want to take you all through a couple of technical things that are going to be related to the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements for everyone to keep in mind. Again, this is brought to you by our colleagues at Children and Family Futures. The telephone number and the website where you can learn more about them are indeed located on this slide. Feel free to take note of this. Also note that we are recording this webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be linked to our YouTube page and also to our colleagues' page and website as well with CFF, with Children and Family Futures. For any access to any of our NTTAC's past webinars or any archived webinars, you may contact us and let us know that you want to get any supporting materials at the OJJDP TTA at usdoj.gov. But at our website, you can also view archives in past webinars, including webinars that we've done in the past for Children and Family Futures. To download a copy of important documents and resources related to today's webinar, what you can do is go to the handouts pod directly above the chat pod there, and here you're going to find the PowerPoint agenda for today and other supporting documents for today's webinar. Simply click on the name of the file and then click the download button, and you should be able to access the file. If you're having any issues accessing those files, then you can contact the OJJDP NTTAC Help Desk, and we'll be more than happy to get you access to those documents. Please note that this is a cafe conversation, and so throughout you can ask questions, any questions that you have. Some individuals have pre-submitted questions, but during today's webinar, if you have questions for our panelists and our presenters for today, please type them in the chat box as they arise. Simply type your question, hit enter or that little bubble there, and it will send in your question that you have for our panelists and our presenters for today. Now, this is an important part. If you all could, please help us count. For those participating in today's webinar in a group, meaning it's yourself and additional individuals, please help us count. Let us know how many people in addition to yourself are joining. So don't include yourself, include the additional people that may be in the room with you today that are joining us for this presentation. What that's going to do is help us get a real good count of how many people that we actually have present for today's webinar. So I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to do that. Again, go into the chat and let us know how many additional people are joined with you today, not including yourself. Do not count yourself. If you're by yourself, there's no need to type anything at this time, just the additional people that are in the room with you today. And I'll give folks just a second to do that. Now, speaking of that, please note that individuals who are indeed signed in, they will automatically receive a certificate of attendance in our feedback email that you'll receive. But if you are signed in with additional people and they want to receive a certificate, please download the group validation document that we have in our handouts pod. What this will do is it will allow you a chance to put in the name of those additional folks that are in the room with you so that we can go ahead and make sure we count for them and they can go ahead and get a certificate. You only need to do that if you have additional people in the room with you today and they want a certificate. If not, there's no need to do anything at this time. This is only for people with additional folks. If you're by yourself, please note, and you're logged in, please note that you will receive an automatic certificate with an automated email that we'll send out at the conclusion of today's webinar. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video and turn it on over to our colleagues at Children and Family Futures, specifically to Kelly Jones, for her to moderate today's cafe conversation. Kelly, feel free to take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, William, and welcome everyone today for joining us. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kelly Jones. I'm having some tech issues, so I apologize that my camera is not up, but we are able to see our panelists, which is great. I am a program associate with Children and Family Futures. We are a national nonprofit organization based in Southern California that focuses on the intersection among child welfare, substance use disorder treatment, mental health, and court systems. Children and Family Futures strives to prevent child abuse and neglect while improving safety, permanency, well-being, and recovery outcomes for children, parents, and families affected by trauma, substance use, and mental health disorders. We also operate the National Family Treatment Court Training and Technical Assistance Program, which is funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, or OJJDP. Today's presentation is supported by OJJDP, and the opinions expressed here do not necessarily reflect those of OJJDP. However, we do thank them so much for their support. I would also like to thank Jacqueline Van Wormer from the National Association of Drug Court Professionals and Wendy Schiller from the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges for helping us with content development and panelist selection. We are really excited to bring this discussion to you today. Today's webinar is part of the 2020 Learning Academy series, Conversations That Matter. These Learning Academy webinars include a short pre-recorded video that your team can watch together. For this particular topic, the video provides information about adolescent development, family engagement, and social and recovery capital. We also have developed a team discussion guide to help teams discuss the need for paradigm shifts, prioritizing youth voice, the use of data, and connections to family and community. In addition, a Take Action Guide will help you and your teams put your ideas into action. Again, you can download today's agenda, which includes information about our panelists today and other learning resources from the materials pod. Furthermore, all registrants will receive a post-webinar email in about the next week or so, which will include a link to our Learning Academy webpage, as well as a link to all of the resources, including those I just mentioned. William, could you pull up our first polling question for today? We want to get a sense of who our participants are in today's conversation. So everybody, if you could just take a moment to answer this question and select what your current discipline is, would be very helpful. Looks like we have a large amount of you participants who are from juvenile justice as well as child welfare, which is great. Also looks like we have some representation from treatment, mental health, court, and legal or judicial as well, and some adult criminal court. Others as well, probation, it looks like, getting a lot of responses in that chat box. Very good. Thank you, William. So let's go ahead and dive into today's topic. Today's webinar is titled Teen Matters, Meeting the Needs of Adolescent Youth. There's so much interesting research right now in the field about adolescents and older youth, particularly those who have contact with child welfare and delinquency systems. Today's discussion will focus on adolescent development and why it matters when serving this population, how family-centered approaches and family engagement can improve outcomes for this population, the importance of connecting adolescent youth in their communities, as well as policy and reform efforts that are currently underway to better serve adolescents and older youth. Today, we have three very impressive panelists: Judge Anthony Capizzi, who is a juvenile court judge in Montgomery County, Ohio; Dr. Martha Blomquist, a senior site manager for the juvenile law programs at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges; and Janelle Scarnoli, program administrator of specialty courts at the Snohomish County Superior Court in Washington. We are incredibly thrilled to have them here with us today. So we will begin interactive discussion with panelists during the last 30 minutes or so of today's webinar. So please use the chat box to engage with one another, share ideas and challenges and resources. Your questions and comments will also help us understand the type of TA tools and the supports that the field needs. If we are not able to get to your question today during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar, please reach out to us through our email at fdc@cffutures.org. Now, I would like to go ahead and give our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves. So today, I will start with you, Judge Capizzi. Would you please introduce yourself, including your role, and share why you care about adolescents?
Sure, Kelly, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you all for joining this webinar, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to be part of it. I'm a juvenile court judge in Montgomery County, in Ohio. We have about 560,000 people in my community. I run the largest juvenile treatment court in Ohio. I also started and oversee a family treatment court and a juvenile mental health court. And I will tell you, over the last 16 years of being a judge and the 25 years before that as practicing, where my focus was on juvenile justice and just children and families, I really have found so many days where I love what I do. I love the fact that we can help families and children change, and we can help change their lives. And, you know, there were so many key moments in my life that got me here to know why I love what I do. But I want to really just highlight one thing. I will say, when I was a juvenile judge at the beginning, in my role as the administrative judge and in my role as a judge, I like substitute myself for parents. So when a child's in front of me, I want to make sure that child is treated the way my kids would be treated. Now my grandchildren would be treated. When I first started on the bench as a juvenile court treatment court judge, I thought to myself, as a parent, why would I ever give these children more drugs because they have a drug problem? So frankly, in my career, 16 years ago, I became the juvenile court judge. I became the judge of the largest treatment court. But I thought I wasn't in favor of giving children drugs. I will say to you, it took me 2-3 years. That aha moment in my career was when I had kids in front of me who may have been 15 and 16, but they deserve the same treatment opportunities as adults. And I realized that in my profession, I had to convince judges that giving youth alternative treatment, be it Narcan or be it methadone, whatever it is, was appropriate. And so that was a real change in my own belief that I learned from educating myself to the National Council and doing other things. I've been past president of the National Council of Juvenile Family Court Judges, and I've led the effort at the National Council level to work with juvenile courts, treatment courts, and mental health courts, and family treatment courts. And I think that hit me 2 years ago. Now it's been 14 years ago. And I've been a very strong advocate of allowing young people to receive any kind of treatment that can help them deal with the challenges. And this agenda day is so important to what I do and how we understand what kids' needs are. And with that, I'll stop and let the other two panelists talk about their own careers.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Judge. We appreciate that. Martha, I'm going to go ahead and call on you next. If you could please introduce yourself and then tell us about what your why is.
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Judge Capizzi. My name is Martha Blomquist, and I'm a Senior Site Manager with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And I just want to thank Judge Capizzi for the shout-out on this medication-assisted treatment, technical assistance bulletin area that SCJ has just covered. We have a new infographic specifically to help judges on this matter of when is it appropriate or how do we approach providing or supporting medication-assisted treatment for individuals in our courts, whether they're adolescents, as Judge Capizzi spoke of, or even adults. So there is a new resource out there, everyone. Wanted to let you know about it. So I've been with the National Council for 10 years. In both our program areas where we provide training and technical assistance to professionals, and I'm looking at the attendee list and the chat list, and I'm so pleased that I recognize many names out there. Hello, thank you for joining us today. It's part of my work that I do get to be on site and travel around the country to work with teams of practitioners like yourselves. And that's definitely a fun part of my job, is actually being on the ground with people and trying to help improve practice. So my program areas with the National Council include child abuse and child welfare, and then juvenile justice, juvenile law, juvenile offending, and delinquency. And I am a training and technical assistance provider. Prior to joining the council, I was a university academic type for many years, and so that meant in my work I taught university students, undergraduate, graduate students, and supported them in their research and engaged in my own. So I kind of have that social science research nerd brain that likes data. It gets all excited, and I'm always encouraging practitioners that I work with to feel comfortable with data and think about it and think about how it can help you with your practice. One of the things that I like about my university career, formerly and now with the National Council, is the ability to keep learning new things. I'm just so committed to the lifelong learner concept and love being involved in organizations that are generating new knowledge, using it, transferring it, applying it, and then doing all of that to make myself a better person as a professional and individual, and then also to help all of us that are involved in juvenile justice or child welfare be more informed, because I think that knowledge is power, and that when we have accurate knowledge, relevant knowledge, and we're constantly looking for ways to apply it, then we make the world a better place, and we bring the best of ourselves to whoever we're serving. And so I just get all excited when I can do trainings like this or a panel or be on site to talk about what do we know and how is it relevant and how can we use it to make things better for all of us.
Great. Thank you so much, Martha.
Off my
No, thank you so much for sharing. Janelle, let's go ahead and have you introduce yourself as well, and then tell us about your why.
All right. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. Thank you, Judge and Martha. I do agree with you on the medication-assisted treatment. It was a 2-year struggle in my court. A lot of philosophical differences for adults and juveniles. And Martha, you do a fabulous job. Martha has done training for my juvenile court several years ago. She's fabulous. So if you need her, call her. So my background started in my career. I've been in county government for 35 plus years. I actually just retired at the end of May. And apparently I don't know what retirement means because here I am again. So I was, the first 25 years, was in the human services field, social work, dealing with youth, families, treatment, homelessness, veterans. So I had that side of the house. When I moved to Superior Court to oversee all of their courts, we had adult, family, and actually 2 juvenile courts at the time when I came on. It was an interesting paradigm shift of well, this is the criminal justice side of the house, and I was always on the soft side of the house. So how do we make that? How do I make that work in my own mind? And so it was a challenge. I came in as the program administrator with the direction from the bench to make these treatment courts the best I can make them and manage federal grants and get federal grants and blah, blah, blah. That's what they wanted me to do. So I looked at it originally from that administrative, bureaucratic piece. And it wasn't until I stepped into the courtroom and I saw the kids and I saw the parents in family drug court and how they were reacting and the circumstances they were in. And it put a face to everyone. And I think that's really important. I've lived in Snohomish County my entire life, so this was my community. These, in essence, were my people. And how do I help them have the same opportunity for success and a healthy, safe life and meet their full potential and do what they'd like to do? How do we make that happen in a criminal justice system? So that's where my shift came, and it's been a fabulous journey for me. I actually wasn't that crazy about retiring, but it's time for somebody else to step in with new great ideas and take the reins, and I think that's really important. But it's that piece of when you are standing in that courtroom and you're looking at those kids struggling and you're looking at there's no one there for them, that their parents can't be there. Parents have their own issues. How do we bring that all together? And as Martha said, I too am a data nerd. She knows that. I love data, and I think that's a great way to demonstrate that you're doing a fabulous job with your programs or how you can make them even better. So I'm hopeful that I have something to contribute. I'm excited to be a part of this, and I hope you all have a great day.
Great. Thank you so much, Janelle. Again, we are so excited to have the three of you here to be able to share just your practice-based knowledge and expertise with the field. So now we're going to go ahead and dive into the conversation, and first want to talk a little bit about adolescent development. Judge, I'd like to start with you. What are some of the environmental and familial risk factors for considerations when serving adolescents and their families?
Well, Kelly, I'm sure most of the people know that we've determined that juveniles, the brain doesn't really mature at 16 or 18. And we talk about adolescents between the age of 13 and 19. But I will jokingly say I have children that are in their late 20s, and they're very smart, well-educated. But there are still days it's like they have no common sense. And so when we say that lovingly about our own children, how do we expect children from age 13 to 19 to have that common sense? Science shows us that their brain really doesn't mature to closer to age 25, and that frontal cortex is that part of the brain which matures last. And that, frankly, is the part of the brain that deals with the social, emotional issues. That's where reasoning, decision-making, impulse control, that all happens. And so when we look at that, we understand these children have these challenges, and we have to say, well, is there more to think about? And I would say to you, yes, there is. So when we talk about all these children, I really like to talk about when I'm speaking about adolescent development is understanding what their challenges are. They have environmental challenges, and I'm just going to list a few for the people that are listening today. There's, in terms of environmental factors, I really define those in three different areas. There are community factors and school factors, and those consist of low community attachment. They have a hard time with their personal transitions. We know that laws are favorable or not favorable for drug usage. So we have a child who's 14 or 15, in their community, drugs are appropriate. Well, no, they're not, but they don't understand that. They can't think that through. Environmental challenges in their community deal with economics. There's a perceived use or allowance of drugs in a community. Media portrayal of kids in that age group is always so negative. They see themselves in, of course, gang environment. In fact, in the school area, in terms of environmental factors, I look to academic failure. In my communities, and I think many communities across the country, when we were growing up, it was a challenge to do well. Teachers wanted to pass you when you did well. I think nowadays, teachers pass kids just to get rid of them. And that's an environmental challenge that the kids aren't used to. Lack of commitment to school of the children and families themselves, and also just bullying. We understand that so many of our children these days are being bullied in schools, so that to me is an environmental factor to deal with as they're trying to teach them adolescent growth. Familiar risk factors, wow, there's a ton of these, but I'll just highlight about 5 or 6. Frankly, poor management by the family themselves. So much initial family conflict. Kids who see their parents, grandparents, siblings, so much familiar conflict in the community. There's a lot of familiar history of antisocial behavior that a child, I joke about it, but it's true. How do I expect a child who's 12 to come to court when they're supposed to? When their family has no acknowledgement of time or space, that their major concerns aren't getting that kid up. So we have to give some of our kids, frankly, alarm clocks to get them to come to court. Obviously, a lot of parents don't understand the difference in what their children should be doing. They themselves are raised in such a weird situation that they don't know how to raise their own children. We have ineffective parenting, as I describe it, and really very little nurturing. We'll talk later about the fact that children, we're talking about children who are being nurtured from adolescence, age 13 to age 19, but we know so much of that training, so much of that love and nurture must take place from 0 to age 5. And so when we look at what we're getting, in a court scenario, we normally see a child in the juvenile justice system maybe when they're 10 or 12 and not when they're 4 and 5. But on the dependency side of the track, we see kids when they're born through ages until they become adults. And so as we look at this adolescent challenges for children, we need to really focus on what are the behavioral problems, what are the environmental and social factors of the community, and can we address those as we understand what the children's needs are. And I hope that's a good start to the conversation, Kelly.
Yes, that's great, Judge. Thank you so much. You bring up some great points about those risk factors and not even just how it affects adolescents at this age, but then how, that early childhood piece also plays a role in the development. I'd like to go to you, Janelle. What can you share with us about to help inform us about normalizing those adolescent behaviors, some of those of which Judge was talking about?
I think it's really important. I mean, this is a huge piece. And as Judge said, brain doesn't develop till about mid-20s. You add trauma, victimization, substance use, now you're talking the 30s. And so you're going to see it in your family court as they're trying to deal with their juveniles and in your juvenile court as well. I think it's really important to have a good trained team so they understand how kids are receiving what we do. I have heard adults in a court setting say, I just don't know why you don't do what I tell you to do. And the kids, well, because I feel like it. And it's that reaching out and understanding that if you frown, the kid thinks you hate them, not that you might be trying to understand what they're saying, and being very aware of how they perceive you as a person of authority. They might have only the experience of an abusive household. So here's another adult who has power. Should I be afraid? You've got the cultural piece as well. There are a lot of different cultures that don't want to come to court because there's bad connotations, and that is the juveniles are feeling that. Maybe I need to protect my parents from the court. So how do I do that? So it's really important to understand where the youth is coming from. One of the things that we've done is we actually sat down with the youth, besides the assessment for substance abuse and mental health and other issues. We did a standard intake, but we had a questionnaire that talked about what do you like? What do you want to do? What do you want to see yourself in 2 to 5 years? Of course, it's very depressing when someone says, I don't know that I'll be alive in 2 to 5 years, and to explore that as well. But to find out what drives them and what their home experiences are, and then work with the family, and however the youth identifies family. Doesn't necessarily have to be just the parents. How do you identify family, and how do we work with you and your family to understand who you are? I mean, treat them with respect, treat them that they have a right to control their lives. They've made some poor choices, and we don't know why. We need to find basically what that driver is. What drove the youth to use substances? What drove the youth to do something that got them in front of a judge? So it's not the effect we're looking at the cause. And where is that? And does that mean we need more mental health or more substance treatment, or do we need mentors? So I think it's really that kids are kids. They're not little adults. Then they're not going to be in the juvenile justice system. So really treat them as where they are emotionally and maturity level, but respectfully. As Judge said, a 12-year-old and an 18-year-old, they could actually be functioning in the same way, given substance abuse and trauma and family dynamics. That's all right there. So really, it's okay for them to be kids, and as adults, we need to step up and help them be kids, but help them be successful.
That's great. Thank you, Janelle. You bring up some really great points, particularly around youth voice, which I know we're going to get into later in our discussion, as well as trauma. So Martha, I want to go ahead and go to you next and ask what you can tell us about trauma and its impact on brain development, as well as understanding substance use disorder treatment for adolescents.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, I just appreciate the coverage that Janelle and Judge Capizzi have given to the issues. I mean, already we've covered a lot of material, and so some of you may be feeling like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of information, and it's overwhelming maybe, but I think that it's really helpful. I've been in the field for 40 years in the juvenile justice field, and I'll tell you, we know a lot more about a lot more things than we did 40 years ago when I started in the field. So yes, we are learning more about trauma, we're learning more about the brain, we're learning more about adolescent development, and in recent times we're becoming a lot more aware of the impact of the justice system, the disparate impact of the justice system on different communities of color. So we have a lot of information out there on what to know and why, for example, the youth act the way they do, or and I'll mention a bit in a moment on substance use and the impact on the brain. But the other piece of it, of the knowledge explosion, is we also know a lot more about what works. And we have research now on what a lot of you are familiar with is evidence-based treatment. And that's treatment protocols that have been rigorously tested and repeated on different populations, especially adolescent populations, to be able to say, yes, this is an effective intervention. And isn't that empowering that we have assessment tools to figure out what's going on, and then once we know what we need, that helps us decide, well, how do we respond to the what? And then we have the responses of the effective treatment intervention. So, you know, I just want to support all of you for being in the field now as practitioners. And this is really, in spite of COVID, or there's some silver linings in COVID, but this is really a great time to be working with families and youth, especially with families and youth that have these additional challenges regarding substance use disorders, mental health, trauma, and so forth. So on the note of the adolescent brain, and Judge Capizzi mentioned some things about adolescent development, and that it's normal, and Janelle talked too about understanding what's normal adolescence for certain behaviors that, and abilities to manifest themselves at a certain age, and then for those to change. And so in that change process is really moving towards more like the adult capacities that we all associate with one another about critical thinking, self-regulation, and managing our impulses and emotions, being able to plan, thinking about other people, not being so self-absorbed, kind of managing our emotions, making good decisions, learning from mistakes, for example. Those are all things that we kind of associate with adulthood and adolescence. That's the whole process of kind of acquiring those tools and abilities. So when it comes to substance use disorders and the adolescent experience, maybe it's different from the adult, is that youth, with the functioning of their brain and what all the wiring that's in place, the prefrontal cortex that Judge Capizzi spoke of, and even the sort of amygdala, which is a source of sort of our emotions, they're not as developed, and so with adults, we often, especially in maybe a family drug treatment court, the adults are really motivated by their life experience so far and like having bad things happen that they don't want to repeat and want to learn from. And our adult brains are really primed to do that. Youth brains are not there yet. And so there isn't this sense of what happened in the past, I'm going to learn from it. That's just not there yet. So that part of the work that we do with youth is to help them with that kind of cognitive connecting of experiences, reflecting, and helping the wiring that allows those kind of thoughts to develop and be there. And different youth are going to have that, their development with that capacity is going to vary from youth to youth. So there's one difference between adults and youth. Another difference with substance use practices and impact and behavior with adults versus youth is youth tend to engage in more binging and adolescents don't. So that's another thing that youth may go along and be okay for a while, and then they do this binge behavior of using substances. Another difference that we'll see with youth that people have asked about in the chat that we may not see so much with adults is the co-occurring disorders related to substance use and mental health disorders and impacts of trauma. And we know that for some mental health issues, they actually emerge in adolescence. That's when, and you could even have a youth in your juvenile drug treatment court when they first came in and you use risk need assessment to figure out what's going on with them. A mental health disorder may not manifest, but actually it may over time because it is an adolescent, it can be, some mental health disorders can be adolescent triggered, if you will. That's the time of their lives when individuals may discover that they do have a mental health disorder. The other thing about youth and different from adults is their immediate focus. And whereas adults, by definition, with prefrontal cortex and their lived experience of in the past and wanting things to be better in the future, adults will likely be more future-oriented, and our youth are at that place where they're very concrete and very here and now. But with the knowledge of these differences with adolescents, we can use this knowledge to leverage what we're going to do to work with them to be more effective, and that's have effective responses, and that's where some of our evidence-based treatment interventions come in. They are based on understanding this is where youth are at with their concrete thinking, with their lack of sort of a retrospective ability of in the past going forward. And so some of our evidence-based treatments that are most effective really capitalize on strategies like using incentives to motivate behavior change. And the adolescent brain, the parts of the brain light up when youth get rewards, and they want to keep having that sense of reward. And that's kind of how drugs work on the brain. The drug stimulates a sense in the brain of reward, pleasure, this feels good, and so the youth want to continue that experience. If you want to move youth into harm reduction or abstinence away from substance use, you can't just take the substance away because that brain is still looking for reward, feel good. So instead, you really need to replace the substance use high with some other behavior or response from the environment that's going to create the high. And that's where our understanding and strategies around incentives really is important. And this is a big difference with adults. Adults, the research indicates, do a better job of kind of thinking the pros and the cons and the bad things that could happen and the good things that happen from the certain course of behavior. And unlike juveniles, adults are sort of more risk adverse. So adults are motivated to reduce the consequences that are negative, whereas youth are thinking, oh, that bad thing isn't likely going to happen, but look at all the great things that are going to happen. And so that's where to change adult behavior, you might use the role of sanctions may have a place, whereas really with adolescents, the rewards and incentives is really the key to supporting behavior change. And it actually makes it a more fun part of our work is to be focused on that rewards and the focusing on what you're doing right, the strength-based approach. How can we build on that? How can you keep repeating this desired behavior, but also accepting that you got to relapse. You screwed up. You made the wrong call. You got around your friends, and you got derailed. And that's another point that I'll make about the difference between the impact of substance use on adults versus juveniles, and then also with treatment, is that adults, we are more independent agents, fully developed, and we're less reliant on social peers for our identity and our sense of self and moving forward. Youth are very peer-oriented. That's just that life phase of adolescence is very peer-oriented, and they can be influenced by peers in undesirable ways, but that can be flipped too, to connect youth with peers who are pro-social. That can help support their behavior too. So I hope this has kind of helped cover some of the substance use impact on the adolescent brain versus the adult brain and some of the differences, and then also with effective treatment.
That's great. Thank you, Martha, for sharing. I can tell that this topic of adolescent brain development is resonating with our audience, particularly as it relates to trauma and co-occurring mental health. I can see some of the comments coming through the chat box that many can relate to that, and I think your explanation of that is really helpful. Judge, I wanted to go to you next really quick before we move on to the next subject of family-centered approaches and engagement. Having heard, and what you know about adolescent brain development, how does that inform your practice level approaches from the bench?
Thanks, Kelly. What Martha just talked about and Janelle talked about is long and complicated, and I'll say it to you in like 10 words. Kids are not adults. They're not little adults. I have so many people in my community who want to treat a 13-year-old and just say, in a negative way, of course, they just treat them as adults that are shorter. And Martha describes all the backgrounds, all the reasons, but in the end, people in our communities don't want to hear the academic reasons why. They don't care to listen. If you just try to explain to people, these loving kids, they're a gift to this society, but they're children. Don't treat a 15-year-old like they're 24. And my background is to say to you, don't transfer them to adult court either. I'm a very strong advocate that children shouldn't be transferred. So as we have these kids and you try and talk to legislators or talk to other judges or other people in your community, Martha has all the data as to reasons why, and Janelle can explain that too. But in the end, just say to them, they're children. Treat them as children. And in our court, as we understood this process 15, 20 years ago, I'm proud to say because of the National Council, we're one of the most progressive courts in the country. And we've used the education that I've learned from them and from other entities around the country to understand that we need to bring data in, but we need to change our educational background in our community. We have to work with the healthcare community, and I know we'll talk about this more later. But simply put, we as a court, it was initiated by a judge. I will say this over and over again. We are all smart people. It's not just judges, believe me. In fact, many judges I wouldn't put up to that level. But the reality is, people expect and respect what a judge says. And I think it's up to the judge to lead the community, to lead the court, to bring in new initiatives, to bring in new educational partnerships. I work really hard to work with our school district in our community, and there are 80 plus of those in my community, trying to get them on the same page. We work with our healthcare providers, our behavioral health providers, to work in partnerships. And all those arrangements have been created by the judges in our community. We created the family treatment court, not the mental health providers. We created the juvenile treatment court and a family treatment court, working with children's services, protect those children and those families. It was court generated, and I think that's where it has to start. They don't have to lead everything down to the very end, but I think the start has to be in the judicial branch to really bring the people together. When I call a meeting, right or wrong, people come. If I'm a school principal or a superintendent, they won't. And so take that power, convince your judges in your community to be at the forefront, to be progressive, to make the changes to help the adolescents we're trying to serve. I hope it answers your question, Kelly.
That's great, Judge. Thank you so much. I love how you're highlighting that important role of judicial leadership in communities because they do have an incredible role when it comes to that effective collaborative partnerships and pulling those teams together and getting the right people at the table. That's actually a great segue into the next portion of our conversation where we're talking about family engagement and family-centered approaches. So Judge, when you're talking about it from a judicial leadership perspective, why is family engagement and adolescence challenging in a family treatment court setting and or a juvenile drug treatment court setting?
Kelly, they're challenging in both. They're challenging in juvenile justice. We're challenging everything that we do, trying to get family involvement. And I sort of break it down to really 3 key words: conversation, explanation, and then justification, which creates a buy-in. If you treat the family, and not just the parents, biological parents, but maybe the foster parents, it may be the custodial non-parent, it may be kinship, whoever is the figure in that child's life, if you explain to them and treat them with respect. And sometimes we lose track of the fact that they have challenges that they don't know how to meet. We have parents that don't know how to raise children through no fault of their own. And so as we work with those children and those families, we need to really have an open dialogue with them. We need to bring them in to the planning process of how we deal with children and families overall. So as we have our teams, we should always be asking ourselves, is there a parent that can be a member of our team as we analyze what we're doing with these families? Is there a way we can learn from them? But if we have conversation with them, if we use the time to explain to them why and what we're trying to do to help them and their child, I still don't believe that there's a parent in this world that wants to hurt their child unless they have serious mental health issues. They just don't know how to help their children. And so as we talk with them, explain to them how we want to try and help them, and then bring their engagement into it. We have parents who are trying to struggle to get their kids to treatment. We have parents struggling to try and get their kids a house and food. We need to understand that challenges. So we need to make sure as we bring this together to get family engagement, we give them wraparound services. It's not good enough to say to that family, bring your kids to treatment every Monday at 4 o'clock for an hour and a half of FFT, family functional treatment. That's not enough. We need to help that family in every way that we can as a community. And that's why bringing in our community partners are helpful. But talking to them about how do we make sure there's a roof over that child's head? How do we make sure we help that parent educate that child? How do we help that child deal with the child's mental health needs? And I think nowadays, and I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but we're dealing with a lot of families that we didn't understand 20 years ago and 25 years ago what crack addiction would do to brain development children. I think we're now, the data that Martha talks about, we're now understanding we have parents that are 20 and 25 who don't have the mental health capability because of many issues they've earned from their family or received from their family. So these are all different ways to talk about what engagement is. If we can do, as I sort of talk about family engagement, it's talking about, let's talk about the treatment for that child as we explain to the parent what level of treatment does that child need. We talk about, and Margaret said it, MAT. Do we give these children and their parents in family treatment court? Are we talking about medically assisted treatment? Do we talk about family involvement in terms of therapy? What different options? And I will say to you that our court, we can't treat every child and family the same. And so in our court, one example of what I mean is that we used to be a court of abstinence. That as we talked about family engagement, it was always, this child has to stop using drugs. Parent, you have to stop using drugs. And we realized that doesn't work in all cases. And so we went to using 7 challenges as an alternative approach. So we have to keep on looking for different options that are fit for that particular family's needs. If we just think of a family, inner city, suburbia, rural, farm, they're also different in their life experiences. And so we need to target our approaches and our family engagement to their needs without the family. And I'll say one more thing, then I'll pass it on. If we don't look at a family through their lens, we look at them through our lens, we have already failed that family. We have to look at what their challenges are through their eyes, respect with the challenges they have, and coordinate a local system, bringing together all the parties to convince that family that as we focus on that child, we're focusing on that family. Because frankly, if we take a kid away from the family and treat them residentially for 18 months and send them back to the same family, is obviously not family-centered approach, and it's failed at family. So working on all the umbrella issues to help that child and its family together and bring that family into the dialogue so they can understand why we're trying to do what we do, and at the same time touching the parent drug addiction issues. And that's a unique situation in family treatment court versus juvenile treatment court and the partnership between the two. If we have an adolescent who's in family treatment court, who's 12 and 13, who maybe isn't using yet, but their parent at age 38 is in family treatment court, as we talk about trying to protect that adolescent from using the drugs that the parent are using, we have so many of those challenges to deal with. I know we'll talk about it later, but it's hard sometimes to break down these in little cubby holes. It's hard to say, to answer this question, we can say it this way without addressing the multiple needs and challenges. And we have so many resources of data now that help us understand that a family-centered family engagement solution can be more helpful for 99% of families. And so as we use that data, I'm a big believer in using data to prove to the people that hold the purse strings. In my case, it's county commissioners, it's state legislators, it's the federal government. You need to use that data to prove to them and bring a parent with you if you can, show how the parent engagement was helpful to raise additional dollars to help support the families and children that we're serving. In the end, we can sound fancy, but it comes down to helping these children and helping these families survive. In my case, as a juvenile court judge, in juvenile justice, I thought it was my job to help kids in the treatment court. I thought it was my job to get them off drugs. But frankly, society's changed. My job is to keep them alive, to keep them in our community, to meet the challenges they have, to get them to be 18, 19, 20, through this period of adolescence, give them enough maturity, enough training, keep them alive till they're 19, and hope at that point I can pass it off to another member of our community to help support them as adults. Kelly, that's a start to the conversation, I hope.
Thank you so much, Judge. I really love that piece that you talk about the conversation, the justification, and the explanation, treating children like children and families like families, because I think that is an important lens for practitioners, us as practitioners, to consider when working with this population of adolescents and their families. I want to quickly go to Martha and ask you, what are some of the strength-based approaches that you can share about engaging adolescents and family? And if you could touch a little bit, too, on procedural justice, that would be great.
Thanks. Yes. And, I just want to make the point again, connecting to adolescent development and why family-centered family engagement approaches make sense is because we want what raises and supports emotionally and, with basic needs and so forth, children and youth as family. It's that in that context we need to be working with youth. And if the parents are challenging because they have their own substance use disorders, we still need to work with the whole family, because ultimately our goal is not for court oversight forever, right? We want our families to be functioning members of our larger community. And so the court can bring to bear through the family drug court or the juvenile drug court or resources to help a family in crises or with different challenges, and whether it's also multi-generational. But ultimately, we want the family to be embedded in a community and connected to the community. So we'll get to that. I know you'll be asking about those community connections, but we do want to keep in mind that youth, ideally, and for their health and development, need to be in a family, need to be nested in a family. It's the family relationships that support youth, and that families, even when kids are mad at their parents or get removed from their parents in the child welfare system or crossover youth, they ultimately always, or many, want to reunite with their parents. They want to have good relationships with their parents, and I think parents want to have good relationships with their kids. So when it comes to a strength-based approach, I think with that family context too, we want to be sensitive, and what Judge Capizzi was talking about is understanding our families and understanding our families through their lens, not our lens, is what it may be like for families to be involved in the court, in a court system. And I think that there's a lot of shame and frustration and being overwhelmed and just like not knowing what to do and feeling impotent and therefore not very good about themselves, that parents, when they come into the court with the children, that's what's going on with them. And so it's maybe hard for them to see that there's any redeeming thing that in their appearance before the court or the court will see. And same with the kids. The kids, haven't done well in school. They don't have good peer relationships or relationships with their parents. And other connections or lack of connections. And so kids are often coming into the court system feeling pretty badly about themselves as well. And maybe inadvertently, some of our institutions have been giving a lot of messaging about you're not going to amount to anything, you're a failure, whatnot. And so really, but when people hear that what they're doing wrong, does that get us all excited about, yeah, I really want to be involved in this program because you think I think. No. And I think it's the challenge of all of us professionals to flip that script to be strength-based, as you were asking about, Kelly, and it's really not hard. I mean, even a family that comes in with substance use issues and trauma and so forth, the fact, A, that they got into court, actually, A, that they woke up that morning and got out the door and got to court, and navigated transportation, traffic, managing their emotions, all of these things to get to court. Actually, that's a strength because for a lot of folks, even that little bit may be really overwhelming. If for those of us who haven't walked in those shoes, we may not appreciate just how challenging that is. If you've got a mental health issue, you've got a substance use disorder, and you're just thinking about your next high, but you get to court, all of those things. And so I think having a strength-based approach, and even when you see something that seems really negative, like this juvenile has an attitude, this juvenile is just committed to the wrong group of friends, you could say, well, let's see, there's some emotion there in that juvenile, and there is a youth that has skills in connecting with others. How can we flip that to a positive thing? And joke around the attitude, or say, hey, about connecting with friends. What do you like about those friends? What would you like to have in friends? To switch the conversation and the lens to be strength-based. And I think that's kind of motivating. And always to come back to that. And even when somebody is messing up, it could be a crisis, a moment, they're having a bad week, even a bad spell of 2 or 3 weeks. If you can look at the overarching sort of behavior patterns over time to keep in a framework, we don't need perfection week to week, day to day. We really want to see behavior change kind of over the long run. And I think that's where a lot of the drug testing and results gets us stuck and looking at the here and now and perfection in the here and now. And really we need to take a step back to say, how are we doing? What's the trajectory of change and improvement, and that can help give us some perspective. The other thing I think was already mentioned about a strength-based approach and what's motivational working with families is really trying to elicit their interest in goals and dreams. And then trying to, unpack that to say, okay, what are some concrete steps that we could take to help you realize those goals and dreams? And that's where the court and its impact and place in the community really plays a great role of a broker of services and connections to help the family make connections, maybe to meet some basic needs, housing and so forth. Not that the court has to do that, but can facilitate connections. And then also with treatments. And you know what? When we're dealing with adolescents, do not forget an important piece, because we know about the adolescent brain and how it lights up with reward and fun and pleasure, is add elements of fun into your program. And it may be true, kids are in your juvenile drug treatment court, for example, because they broke the law, they're doing things, illegal things, and maybe harmful to other people. And same with your family drug court program. Parents are in there because they've broken the law, they've done some bad things. But please keep in mind, just because of that, it doesn't mean you can't make the program experience and court experience enriching and actually fun sometimes. And so I think that's really where the power of the family drug court can come in. And even with juvenile drug treatment court, is plan things to help families experience fun with each other, because that may be missing in a lot of families. The stressed out families that Judge Capizzi spoke of and Janelle, that may be something that is a new experience for families, is really to enjoy each other's company and have an experience that they've done together that's fun. And so I would really encourage teams to build that into your program. And this is where some of your community connections come in for resources, venues. Like the faith-based communities, I think, are one place. A lot of them have their own kitchens and multi-purpose rooms for bringing people together around meals, and seeing if they could partner with your juvenile or family court to offer a venue for a place where these shared family experiences can happen. So I would promote that. And really, the buy-in that Judge Capizzi spoke of, I think is really looking at the family from their lens and their goals and their aspirations. And the other piece that Kelly invited commentary on is procedural justice. And basic to that is kind of what Judge Capizzi was speaking of, is being respectful to our families, really, really respectful. And again, if they've had a lot of experience with systems where they felt disrespected and they felt like they were nothing and they were viewed as nothing, the court can't go far enough, cannot go overboard in communicating a different message of, we really respect you and we're here to support you, and we believe in you and your goals and your aspirations, and we want to help you with them. So that I would say that, and on the procedural justice piece, I would also say that some of our families of color, we know these days with a lot of the protests, have just experienced terrible treatment and unfair treatment from different institutions. Law enforcement is obviously much in the news. And so what we do know about the research on procedural justice are some really basic things. That even if there's a decision that the court renders that a particular individual, parent, or child doesn't like, they will still respect the decision and go along with it if there are certain factors in place. And one is if they have been treated with respect and given voice, they've been heard. You ask them directly to weigh in and say, tell us about your perspective on this. What was your experience? What would you like to have happen? That kind of, what are your goals? That's one matter. Another matter is that if there's a perception of the decision maker as being impartial and not having a bias or agenda with the language that the decision maker uses and whatnot. So that impartiality of being open and interested is important. Also, the third factor is that the information that the decision maker is using to reach a decision is clear. It's been shared. What Judge Capizzi was talking about is understanding, explaining justification. Really take time to explain what and why and how. And, not overwhelming, but really, basic. And that is part of treating somebody with respect, to say they deserve to know. And that is also quality control, is you have to make sure, hey, I'm really basing my decision on these factors, and they're objective and they're clear. And then the last thing that's really important to use is feeling like the person who's making a decision really cares about their well-being. And that can come, judges have all kinds of demeanors on the bed. Some are warm and fuzzy, some are humorous, some are kind of quiet, soft-spoken. So that communication of caring can come out in a variety of ways. But that you message that for the judges that are on this listening to here, that you, and all professionals, that you message that you care about the well-being of the youth matters to them. The other thing that I would just say on that note is, again, with our research and knowledge about the disparate experiences that youth and families of color have in our society and with our systems, is there's a lot of icky stuff we know that has happened that either families themselves have experienced with law enforcement, or they've heard about other members or neighbors who have had bad experiences, who, violence at the hands of officials and so forth. And so remember, our families of color come to the court with a lot of distrust and a lot of reason to be distrustful. And when you're dealing with youth in particular, and you feel like there's an attitude, or like the sense of, I'm an adult, you need to respect me, I'm the court, you need to respect me, I would just say another angle on that is, with adolescents, sometimes trust and respect needs to be earned. And how it gets earned is that when you try to develop a relationship with the youth, and they have a sense of you and your genuine caring of them, then they may be willing to share more of themselves. So you may start off with asking them about their behavior, especially around drug use, and they're going to deny it. They're going to, don't know, some kid I didn't know gave me the drugs, whatever, and you may come on, I wasn't born yesterday, But part of that is those youth may be responding to you because they don't really know you, and they don't know if they can trust you. And they don't even know if they should respect you, even if you are on the bench, if you have a robe on, or whoever you are as an adult. And so be patient and realize that actually that's probably pretty normal adolescent response, that adolescents to this life phase move away from trusting and doing what adults say. That's what children do. And then adolescence is a period where that's not happening. And so if you want to have a connection with a youth, it's got to be based on a genuine relationship. And then over time, a youth may be more forthcoming and honest. And so I always worry about juvenile drug treatment courts that kind of ding youth because they're dishonest. And yes, being honest helps with treatment, but I also want to remind people of that relationship factor and the sensitivity factor of, you don't really know a youth experience with all the adults in their lives and who's disappointed them, who's been inconsistent with them, who's hurt them. And so they're not going to come to you just automatically because you're an adult and you're with the court and you say you mean to do well. They're not going to automatically trust that. So I think that that's part of the procedural justice piece and the strength-based approach pieces of working with families and children. They go together. And I think that's and the fun factor, communicating just a real positive regard and hope for the families that you work for. And I think that's the work with, and that's the bottom line that I'm always impressed by all of you out there in the trenches is that's one thing I think you do offer families and why you're in the work is because you have hope. And you want to offer them hope and dreams and tools to get there. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Martha. Janelle, I wanted to know if you have anything else that you would like to add, particularly when we're talking about engaging adolescents and their families, and maybe share some of those challenges and barriers and how you've been able to overcome them.
Thank you. And it is quite the challenge. Some of the things that we did in our juvenile court is we started right front when we did our intake. We sat down with the youth and the parents or whoever was identified as family separately and then together. Said, what motivates you? What would you like to do? What do you not like to do? If we were going to sanction you, what might that look like? If we were going to incentivize you, and we use terms like reward you, terms that kids are more likely to understand, that if we were going to reward you for behaviors, use the appropriate terms, what would that look like? For example, we had a youth that was struggling but loved skateboards. So working with your community, and I think it's important to really have good relationships with community services. I know not everyone has a ton of money to provide services, but there's a lot out there. So if you're willing to step out, do some community mapping, and meet with those organizations that can help you, you get services technically for free. So we connected with this individual who built skateboards. made sure it was an appropriate environment, actually went with them a couple times. But when the youth did good, had a great week, did his drug testing, it was negative, went to treatment, did what he needed to do, he got to go and learn how to build skateboards. The motivator for him to continue with that behavior was, you slip up and that stops until you correct. We didn't punish people for dishonesty. We reminded them that they're lying to themselves as well, and we're here to help them. But having that list of things that motivated those youth, so we could use those as the reward for good behavior. I mean, we did some silly things too, and we had a giant UA cup, and we motivated them to go do UA testing so we could fill the cup. Things that kids thought were funny, and we tried to make that work with them as well. Some of the things we've done also is we had a parent mental health group. So it meant after court, the parents all got together, those who could attend court, and we had a mental health counselor there. We provided food. I mean, it was cheap pizza, but we provided some food. We had a separate group for all the youth. So they got pizza as well. They had either a counselor talking to them or we let them watch a movie, but they did it. It's that clean fun, working together. Then we did game night, and that's families involved. Once a month after court, we play games. Charades, bingo, it didn't matter. We provided food. All the staff, the team, judge included, participated in that evening to, again, build that relationship with those folks. But it is so important that the parents have a voice, or if they can't have a voice, that somebody who cares about that child can. If there was some discord in the family, we actually had an individual who remarried, and his new wife said, I don't want the kid in the house, and the kid took the 16-year-old out. So how do we take that youth who's just been kicked to the curb and provide support to that youth by engaging in who he perceived as family? Who was there for him? He had an uncle, loved him greatly, was willing to come to court, was willing to engage. Anything that was legal still required the parent involvement, but he had that support. Other things we've done to build that relationship and help these kids are mentors. And this is going to sound strange, but adult drug court graduates, once they've had a period of sobriety and no criminal activity, are really great mentors for this population because they've walked in those shoes. I did the same thing you did as a youth. This is what happened to me, and this is where I am now. One thing for me or the judge to say, you need to improve because it's something else when I did what you did, and I did take control of my life, and I am now successful, and you can too. You have the power to control your destiny. You have the power to determine how you succeed and go through the court process. It's up to you. Mm-hmm. And I think giving kids that power and giving families the same power of you can control yourself and we can provide those services to you. Honestly, if I'd have had my way, every youth that was in my family drug court, any adolescent, as they had substance use, I'd have been providing them treatment as well. Every parent in my juvenile court, if I could provide substance use treatment to them, I would have. Again, it's bottom line budget, how much money do I really have? And, you know, bake sales only go so far. So I think it's really important to do those ties together and build that relationship. So the kid's going to call you up and say, guess what, I screwed up. And the family's going to call and say, I am struggling, can you give me a little help? And that they'll call you, and then you can provide a direction to them, even without having to actually put the service in front of them and fund it yourself. You can have that list of services that you can provide to them, all based on that entrance interview that you did. So my 2 cents. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing, Janelle. Those strategies that you talk about with regard to building relationships and balancing the voice of youth and parents, I think is really important, and establishing that trust, as you said, so that they're giving you a call and that open line of communication is established. So that's great. I know we are running short in time, and we want to make sure that we get to some Q&A questions for the open Q&A. Really quickly, I'm going to ask Judge one more question here. What policy wins have been achieved for youth and adolescents, and what can you share about court and community relations?
Sure, Kelly. First, I want to make sure that I don't forget other resources. We talked about the National Council as being a great resource, but National Center for State Courts the National Drug Court Professor NTTAC. I want to show you this. This is the National Judicial Opioid Task Force, which I served on. And we've created a toolbox, a toolkit, for justice professionals, mental health, behavioral health, treatment providers. It has a wealth of assets in it that can help people work on these issues for juvenile justice issues and adolescents. So don't forget to use all the resources that we have out there as we talk about ways to effectuate change. I think part of the answer is of successes. We've dealt with successes of making people realize and working with the LGBTQ community and youth. We understand now that there are differences. We've talked about diversity. We've talked about proportionality. We need to deal with those issues of racial disparity. And I think there's been progress. Not that we've been successful in every area, but we've made progress in many of those areas. We talk about trying to deal with children in different areas. Let's talk for a second about Family First Act. What an amazing opportunity over the next few years. Really, the Family First Act was a response to shifting needs. It's a way to shift the landscape to focus on children and families as we deal with these. And we talk about crossover youth, the Family First Act, which really is the Family First Prevention Services Act. You know, that will give communities, and I know I've seen in the chats people talking about lack of assets, lack of resources. You need to find a way to have your community buy into the Family First Act and look at all the resources available in that. There's so much opportunity for funding for prevention to deal with these challenges that we're working with in terms of adolescent needs. So talking about mental health issues, looking to the Family First Act to find resources to deal with those issues, to look to them to deal with in-home placement issues. You know, every child shouldn't be placed, no child should be placed in cognitive care. If we can find a way to have that child stay at home or with kinship or maybe foster care, but really not in group homes. And Family First Act is there to try and make sure we limit as much as we can those kinds of facilities that have 30, 40, 100 kids in them. Family First Act is a win in that it gives us opportunities and assets for intervention. It's, again, giving the states, and we need to work through the states for these dollars, but it's working with your state elected officials and your state Supreme Court to try and make sure that there's intervention dollars from Family First. And finally, and I mentioned earlier, the family placement issue. So between intervention, prevention, and family placement, let's use Family First as the major resource over the next 3 to 10 years to make a difference in working with children and families in these areas. So, you know, again, this is just the beginning. I could talk about dealing with youth of color. I could talk about we've created, and I'll say this, in my treatment court, we were having a lot of our kids graduate. This morning I had a young man graduate. I was so excited that I had a young man graduate from treatment court. But we found out about 4 or 5 years ago that we were having more Caucasian kids graduating than youth of color. And so we worked out a grant. We begged for grant dollars, and I've seen that in the chat line. We do a great job of begging all over the state and the feds and every nonprofit we could find to get dollars. So we put out a request for funding to try and find a way. Was there something we were doing wrong? Because I thought we were doing a great job, but we weren't. Data proved to me that we weren't. And so we got a grant to look at how can we better work with youth of color to help them succeed in our treatment court. And we did that about 4 years ago, and I think my court's probably the only one in the country that started that. We now come up with solutions to try and work with youth of color. And so now, frankly, my success rate of youth of color is higher than my success rate of Caucasian youth. And it's because we found there was a problem, begged for money, got the money, and worked through it. So these are all small achievements, but they're making major changes. And I've talked around the country about how my court found a way to help youth of color graduate. And it was just working a different approach. It was looking for what the needs were and then solving that problem. So again, a lot of positives. Data has been able to prove to us, and I think, you know, we talk about the National Center for State Courts, we talk about National Council, but we also have the National Council is the major data collection agency through our center in Pittsburgh. Martha, I've lost the acronym right now. What's the acronym?
National Center for Juvenile Justice.
Thank you. National Center for Juvenile Justice. If you need data on JJ issues, go to the National Center, go there to get the data that you need to try and help through these matters. So I think that's a start. Again, this solution will never, or we have not solved the problem. Looking in the chat box, you can see that everybody has different challenges along the way. But I can say that these are really things that we didn't have 20 years ago. 20 years ago, our kids were lost. They were slipping through the cracks. Our families weren't given the respect they deserve. And so probably the biggest success is that we have convinced people that kids matter, families matter, and use all these resources and use the Family First Act to make the change that we want to make and look for resources to make it happen. So with that, Kelly, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Judge. I know that we only have about 12 minutes left, and we've got a lot of question and answers coming in, so I just want to remind folks, if we don't get to your question, to please drop your email address into the chat or reach out to us at fdc@cffutures.org so that we can be sure to be responsive to what your needs are. This next question, I'm going to go to Janelle and then Martha. Question from the participant about, can you provide some strategies for systems and community re-engagement as it relates to the principles of systems of care? Janelle?
Thank you. Community re-engagement is so important. In a treatment court, and we discovered this years ago because we had huge recidivism rates, is we have our hands on these youth and their families right up until they complete. And then we go, bye, out the door you go, and in essence, drop them. So some of the things we've been doing is reaching out to various community leaders within our county, whether it's a community of color or a community neighborhood. We have some very unique neighborhoods in our county, reaching out to those natural leaders and talking to them about how do we work with you, and going to them, not calling them up and saying, come to court to chat with us. Going to them. We want to help your families. We want to help your kids be successful. So really engaging them and having them come to court, having them, and I know I said not come to court to meet with us, but be there for the kids. So when the youth is sitting in court, maybe they see a face that looks like their face or somebody they know from their neighborhood. So to building that support and allowing them to continue building that relationship that will go on after they're out of our court system. Another thing we did is provide mentors. We went through a comprehensive mentor program. We had everybody trained, and so we had mentors, and so youth would engage with that mentor who would do things with them, be there in court for them, continue that relationship on after they've left court, connecting with other things that youth like. If they had a church that they went to, we actually let them count going to church as a pro-social activity as part of their work for the week, because it was clean and sober, it was something good for them, and so we let them count those things. So when we got rid of focusing on sober support, which is very difficult for youth, and said instead pro-social activities that involve more than one person, that are clean and sober, and then you're getting some benefit, whether it's belonging to a sports team or belonging to your church, or you go to the community center once a week or twice a week. We allow them to connect, to count that, and then share that with us. I did this week, and really praise that connection. So again, that's something else that they'll maintain after our hands are off these kids, figuratively speaking. And that gets back to the community mapping as well. If you know what's in your community and can help do that warm handoff for these youth to build those relationships, you know that they'll be supported after the fact, after they're done with us. And that applies to family drug courts as well, whether they're juveniles as part of a family drug court or the parents themselves, connecting them to those same services to help them stay connected. The biggest things we hear from our participants was, I needed the accountability to be successful. And they really, as much as they hated drug testing, they said that's what held them accountable. So building that group, that relationship in the community that in essence is holding them accountable because they're partnering and they have a relationship with them, I think is really important for this population that we're serving.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Janelle. Martha, can you weigh in on the same with regard to strategies for systems and community re-engagement as it relates to principles of systems of care?
Sure, and I think Janelle did a beautiful job of covering a lot of the terrain. And the resource mapping, there are some tools that you can find from the National Council or online that literally, it's an exercise that your team can do together, or specific individuals on your team, to literally map out the resources, list who's in our community, the formal leaders, the cultural centers, the faith-based folks, the Chamber of Commerce. Every community, even if it seems like it's bereft of resources, has community connections. And then taking the initiative, the team taking the initiative. And I would say, too, that this is really important. I know the teams may feel overwhelmed, but a lot of the successful work can be helped by the example Janelle gave of warm handoffs, that the team members take it upon themselves to do some hand-holding and facilitating connections, and not just to assume something's going to happen. So I think that's really that the team, and then once you have those community connections, you share the responsibility and the burdens. So it's not always on the team to do all these wonderful things. You have your partners that will help you and pitch in the areas that are really their areas of expertise. And then the other thing is, I would say about the community engagement, is think about your program and who the staff are on your program, and what do the families look like that you're serving. So you want to have a good matchup, a good reflection, so that when families come to your program, they see people like themselves who are the folks on the team. And they can relate to you. The providers that you bring in, the community groups that you bring in are more of that. This is what our community looks like. They look like you. You look like us. We can work together on that. So I think that would be the other thing that I would add to that community engagement, is you really want to think critically about how can we enhance our team? Who else do we need to add? What does our team look like to the families that we're serving, so that they feel like it's not us and them. It's like we're in this together as a team.
Perfect. I love that, because we are all better together, and we're in it together. So this is great. So I do have one last question. I know that we are getting ready to wrap up. So one last question for each of the panelists. I would like you to share in 1 or 2 sentences, what advice do you have for judges, family treatment court professionals, juvenile drug treatment court professionals, and other practitioners who are or want to work with adolescents? Judge, let me start with you.
Sure. Don't think you know everything. Accept technical assistance from everybody, because it's a complex issue. And I think there's so much information out there and resources to use. That, and beg for assets to get it done. That's my 2 sentences.
Great. Thank you, Judge. Martha, how about you?
I would say, when you're trying to figure out, are you successful, measure your success by the goals and dreams of your participants rather than your sense of yourself. And that's where you're really basing your program on what are the interests and goals of what the people that we're serving and the families we're serving, what do they want, and then measuring success that way. I'll give you an example. If you may have a youth in your program who's a poly drug user, serious stuff, heroin to marijuana, and a success for that kid might be, I just want to manage myself better, and even just reducing my substance use to marijuana, but being able to be in school and to stay in school is my goal. And so you might have an agenda of, no, you should be sober, but you could be a success with that youth if that is the behavior change that's happened.
Great. Thank you so much, Martha. And Janelle, please.
I agree with the judge. You need to be paying attention to your data. It will tell you how you're doing. I think it's really important for the entire team to continually educate yourself on who you're serving. What's your community like? What are they facing? And we have COVID. We have a lot of other issues going on in our community right now, and that's tough on families, and it's tough on kids, and kids might not understand everything that's going on. So I think it's critical that we make sure that we educate ourselves so we are better able to serve them. And then I think we just need to remember to show compassion and patience with this population, because they're going through tough things. That's why they're in front of us now, and we're here to make sure they're successful, whatever successful looks like to them. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much again to all of our panelists for sharing their experiences and their expertise. Before I turn it over to William, I do just want to remind participants that if we were not able to get to your Q&A question live, to please reach out to us via email at fcc@cffutures.org, and we will be sure to follow up with you with a response. Clearly, we could talk about this issue for another 2 days probably and still not get it all covered. So William, I'm going to go ahead and pass it along to you, and participants, there is some housekeeping information within the chat box too. Please, if you could follow up with that as well. Thank you. Looks like William might be having a, is he there?
Maybe he's taking a
William needs to take himself off of mute. That's what it is. And figure out why my camera. Okay, there we go. Okay, I think I came back in. So again, thank you all very much for today's discussion. And again, thank you to our panelists, Martha and Judge Tony and Janelle. Again, thank you very much to our moderator, Kelly, for just such a great discussion for today. We're going to wrap up just with a few last-minute announcements for everyone. So please note that we do indeed have upcoming, let me skip along here in the presentation. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of a lag. But if you would like to contact OJJDP's NTTAC, you may do so by reaching out to us with the contact information here. You can click here to sign up for our listserv, or you can also go to OJJDP TTA to like us on Facebook as well. I'm getting a little latency here on my end, but I believe the next slide, it should be coming up for you all. Yeah, a little latency here. Let me make sure. Clicking along here. Okay. Well, if you have a training or technical assistance need, please note that you can go to TTA 360 in order to get access to this platform in order to submit a training or technical assistance request, and we can help you there. Just a reminder that this will be on YouTube. As I mentioned before or earlier, please take a minute to look at the disclaimer, the attribution, and also the disclaimer that we have here. I'll give you guys just a second to review that. Also, don't forget that we do have our online evaluation that will be provided, so please provide your feedback for today's presentation as well. And then we do have a couple of upcoming events, one coming up for September 17th with our colleagues at CFF, focused on domestic violence from survivors to thrivers. Then we also have a webinar with our colleagues at National District Attorneys Association that will focus on relationships with communities and police. You can register for these here. And let's see. Uh-oh. Sorry, the latency is a lot. Went a little late there. Please note that we do have, again, these webinars coming up for prosecutors with Zero Abuse Project. And I'll just hold these up a little bit here so you all can learn more. We also have these links available in our slide deck as well, and more events here. And I'm going to end with us going to the final poll for today. If you all could, just let us know, how do you plan on applying the information that you learned in today's webinar? Please note that you can select multiple items here, but let us know, how do you plan on applying today's, what you learned in today's webinar? Again, thank you all very much, and have a wonderful afternoon. Take care, and we appreciate your time for today. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Hello? Hello? William?
Susan?
The host has left the
Hello?
meeting. So at this time,
Hey,
the
Susan.
meeting